Yahoo, Prof here, and we've got another one of these manky-janky videos for you. This time it's on a product that you might have seen on a previous video of me cracking open things that came in from Amazon, and that is related to USB 3.1 Type C. And me, I'm needing it to add it to the repair PC. To be able to pass USB directly through, rather than an individual device, I need to be able to pass the controller through to the Windows VM that is in there. Because, I'm sorry to say to all you Linux guys out there, at least for me, there are still a number of things that Windows just does better, easier, quicker, or at least I know better, at a minimum. Sometimes it's that item is only available that way, for example. And we're going to, this is not necessarily one of those items. This item obviously will work fine, even in macOS, because it is actually running the ASM-3142 chip. You're like, why does that matter? Well, why that matters is I stumbled onto a thread. If we go here, WinRaid forums, and I saw it was, and it looks like Level 1 Techs is helping them, hosted by Level 1 Techs. I think they helped recover the forum, if I remember correctly. But this, okay, let's get back into why we need this, right? And that is because this has its own chip in there under that little heatsink, right? And since it's PCIe, and I specifically need a PCIe 1X, which is not common, they actually do mention down here that you will not get disadvantage. 2x USB-C ports share the 8 gigabit speed and cannot reach 10 gigabits simultaneously. PCIe 3.0 by 1 equals 8 gigabits. So I kept trying to find, okay, if this is a PCIe 3.0 by 1, I want a PCIe 4.0 by 1 because that would give me 16. I could easily then do 10 over a 16 gigabit connection. However, this chip that is in here, right, that the ASM 3142 that is plugged right into that PCIe slot, right? It's PCIe 3. So it turns out there are PCIe Gen 4 chips, right? But they, by default, just the one chip uses a PCIe 4 by, I think it's either 4 by 2 or 4 by 4 slot. I don't have that. I have 2 by 1s in that shitty ASUS motherboard that is still... ASUS has updated almost all, if not all, of their motherboards, right? This fucker right here. Let's refresh this page just to make sure, right? Oh, it's taking its sweet time, isn't it? All right, drivers and tools, right? We're gonna go back to BIOS and firmware. 120cc. Let's go to the ASUS board that is in this system right now, right? This one has 120F, right? And then if you go up even more, I don't think I'm on the 5302. BIOS update includes critical firmware TPM upgrades. Bingo, bango, bongo. I should probably do this one now because it has enhanced system stability, security compatibility. But this was the one that was required to be able to play Black Ops 6 and Black Ops 7 beta. Like Black Ops 6, after an update, it would flag. And then Black Ops 7 beta. And then now Black Ops 7 because it's out. And also Battlefield 6. People are running this. I made entire videos about this, right? Very weird that this board, right? This one, which is an ASUS board, has not had an update, and I checked global website as well, since last year, right? This was almost in that same situation. It had the 120cc. It did get an E. The F took a hot minute, and they put out the F actually after the TPM firmware update was actually out. It would have been out beginning of this month, yet they didn't include it. And there was no indication because they had just updated that they would update it again. So They did, except on this one, which is a piece of junk. It's like, it'd be like buying X570 for an ITX board. You can't take advantage of it, right? That's effectively what happened here. They didn't put enough of the crap on there, like slots and ports, etc., to actually use X570. I've had B450 and B550 motherboards with more features than this motherboard. But that's why I have to use this, is because we have a 16x slot. This slot down here is not a 8x. That would cut that in half to an 8x, right? And it doesn't have an additional 4x. This is 4x through the chipset. Then we have a 1x, and we have two 1x's, right? And I might buy a second one of these if this works out as planned, because then I can have two controllers with 4 ports that are passed through to my Windows VM. So this isn't the huge thing. It was just finding this specific model. Like, I needed one that was a 1x slot. I did not need USB-C. I needed 10 gigabit. Basically what it comes down to is, if you want the true 10 gigabit, you're getting USB-C ports, because the ASM-3142 chip is USB-C native. Hey, that's fine by me. I would rather have USB-C and have to use an adapter, just like a A to C adapter, than not, right? And it is a buy one slot. Almost all the other buy one slots didn't use, they were all 5 gigabit. Right. So even though we can't get the full 10, we only got 8 because we're on the buy one 3.0. That's fine. But what I did find out researching this, right? And then when I found out what the restriction was, is the restriction is actually this chip. The chip from ASMedia, which I believe is owned by AMD now, is only PCIe 3.0, right? Which is fine. Once I figured that out, it's like, okay, so that's why basically in order to get enough bandwidth, a lot of these actually go to PCIe 3.0 by 4. As that's what's required, because they can't use a higher spec PCI Express if the chip itself doesn't support it. However, while researching this, I did find this WinRaid forum article that was talking about issues with one that was, this is specifically a 2142, and then down here they mentioned that later on, the 2142 and 3142 ended up having the same driver. I don't know if it's driver, I think driver and or firmware. But they're mentioning about updating it, and I'm like, and they talk about station drivers, firmware version, yada, yada, yada. So I started poking into that. And you're like, well, why are you doing that? Well, I've learned, going all the way back, like I used to have and I did some research on this. Here you go, Rocket U, High Point Technologies Rocket U. I've used these plenty of times. They don't have the ones that I had, because the ones I had were USB 3. Like my dad has one that adds USB 3 with a header, because back when he got that, motherboards didn't have headers yet, right? And the cool thing about these Rocket U cards is that they do 1 port per chip, right? So if you can see, 4 ports, 4 chips. So that means you get, if they're saying you get 10 gigabit of type A port, right? You're getting 10 gigabit per type A port. And that's a buy 8 slot right there. Some of these require extra power. Oftentimes, I was actually using, because I had 2 of these cards, I have one that had 2 external ports and then 2 internal ports, and then I had one that had 4 external ports, personally, because my motherboard already had front panel USB. And it was the Intel. Intel usually went to the front panel. Intel usually had 2 front panel, 2 rear panel, and if you had any more than that, it would be third party, which were garbage. I would recommend literally blocking them off effectively. ASMedia was about as close as you could get, because ASMedia is the one who bought the patent or technology package from NEC, who made the original USB 3.0. So realistically, the only companies that make good USB 3.0 are going to be Intel, who never made an external card, and ASMedia. And AMD's USB was so rubbish and garbage to the point where they had ASMedia make their initial chipset for them. Like the original Ryzen chipset was designed by ASMedia. And they did such a good job, from my understanding, they were bought. And then that team still makes the AMD chipsets, or at least designs the chipsets to this day. So what's kind of been weird, though, is after a certain point, because I have had the drivers for USB 3.0 basically to the point where it doesn't matter anymore. I don't know if I'm even going to have... I don't even think I have it in my driver package anymore because it has been... basically it's integrated into Windows now. ASMedia does not publish... you might be able to find them on your motherboards page. That's probably the one good place you can find them. Dell's often a good resource if you need them and your motherboard doesn't provide them. But realistically, because it's such a common piece of hardware now, they just publish them. Same thing like Surface drivers get published straight to Windows Update. Now, that makes sense because it's Microsoft, right? There's some other stuff like that just gets published, like for the Razer Blade laptops, they decided rather than maintaining their own drivers page, annoyingly, is that they'll just publish it to Windows Update. Now, that did get me stuck in a way that with my Blade Stealth, it was only certified for Windows 10, so it fails to install the Windows 10 drivers in 11. So if you got to install 10 first, then upgrade to 11, and there isn't any way to get around it. Really fucking annoying. That's why always, guys, if you get a system that comes with a pre-built Windows image, if you're I always reinstall it. But that might not be the best option. In this case, you are better off using the Razer image and upgrading it to Pro or something like that, because there are things in there that display calibration and all this. There are ways you could extract that. But once you get to a certain point, it almost becomes easier to just modify their image to do what you need and strip the stuff you don't need out, rather than trying to put the stuff that you can't get back in. And this did save me. Geek Squad had to actually replace my motherboard in my laptop under warranty, and they re-imaged it straight to Windows 11, and it was working funky. Luckily, I had that USB. Just spend the $10. Get yourself a USB. So if we go to software, drivers, and we pop this over here, and we go to ASMedia USB 3.0, this used to be in my main drivers folder. As of a certain period in Windows 10, I think it was 20H2 or something like that, this was effectively... That is NFS for you, or at least the NFS driver for Windows for you. You just got to close File Explorer and go back through. And then you got to find out, okay, what other folder do I have open? And then you got to close it. Either way, we're going to prove I have the ASMedia USB 3.0. It's very hard to get clean, not customized versions of that driver. So the only place that I knew back in the day to get it was High Point, because they literally just took the chip, stuck it on a board, and put it out of port, right? And they had the drivers available. They don't anymore, and the reason is they even had a thing hey, if you're running this in newer, don't install it. It's kind of realistically, you shouldn't be installing the Samsung NVMe driver anymore because it hasn't been updated. Basically, after the 970 Evo, maybe the Evo Plus, but for sure the Evo. If you go back, it's 950, the 960s, but 950, 970s, you want to use that driver. Anything 980 and up, you are actually going to hamper your performance doing that. Just use the built-in Microsoft one, as it has not been maintained and updated. That's basically what happened here is ASMedia does update and publish new drivers, but they just publish them straight to Windows Update. So you just get them. How do you know that you just get them? That I can show you. Hold on. Lovely. I gotta love when the Microsoft Store, and I don't know if I can move that even. No. I gotta love when the Microsoft Store. Here, I can put this over here. Basically, it says you have too many devices. Because you don't have like, they want you to add all your stuff to your Microsoft account, but then they're like, oh, you have more than 10 devices. And yes, your because I'm using the Microsoft Store, my Xbox One counts as a device. Like, come the fuck on. My desktop is in here twice. I'm like, unable. Of course, both the old version of this system that you're seeing right now, which is the repair PC, and the previous version of my desktop, like it's the previous install, it sees it as a different system, even though it's not. I can't unlink the devices. Lovely. All right. So either way, hopefully you guys are seeing the remote desktop connection to my server. You can see here, because this is, I'm booted straight into Windows rather than through Unraid and hosting it kind of as a VM, right? I've disabled any of the drives that are the Unraid drives. So that's the cache drive, right? And then these three are the hard drives that are making up the Unraid array. They're just 2 terabytes. You just need something redundant to do backups to, and that's usually enough. But we're going to go down into is here Universal Serial Bus Controllers. This guy right there, because you have your AMD, right? You got all your hubs. So this is my issue, is why I can pass through devices, but I can't pass through like the root host bus controller, right? So that's why we're adding this card in. So if we right click on here, the driver for this from 2025-10-23, it is so much newer than the last time it was independently updated was 2020, right? So do not, even if your device manufacturer, if it has an ASMedia chipset, do not use the driver that comes from your motherboard manufacturer or your third-party card unless it doesn't work. Now, one thing that might fix that is what I am doing right now, which is, it turns out that people have gotten, because this is so widely used, I don't know where they're getting this firmware. Fuck if I know. But they do. On station drivers, and I have used these before. I don't know why all of the weird driver websites, I was commenting on this to the guys in the Discord, why they're all French. But they are. Don't know. One of the other ones that, if you remember on the previous video I had where I was trying to find out of date, or I was trying to find the Sabre tool, which I still need to download myself. I just realized I haven't done that yet. That was one of the options before, besides the RU website, the Russian website, was a French website as well that I had to translate in order to know where it was going and what it was doing. This places I've used before. You know, people have also talked about using it. It's kind of like a known repository for this sort of stuff. So I went through here. I took the link that they had in here. It's sent to this firmware version. Right, if we click on this, apparently it's unable to connect. It's refreshed. Did my VPN just shit itself? Nope, it's just a weird link apparently. Where is our... Click there, we go to firmwares. And we need the 3142, right? Which is part of this. The 1142, 2142, 3142, 3242, yada 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 yada. There is a 4242, right? That one right now is the one that has to be a by 4. That is actually part of the reason why on AMD's AM5 systems that you lose a by 4 lane if you if it has USB 4. And USB 4, I don't want to say it's mandated, but pretty much everyone's using it. AMD is now rolling out a option in their UEFI to disable that USB 4 to get back your by 4 lanes if you don't use it. I think that's on X870 specifically. It might be also E, but E might not be an issue because of the better chipset, yada yada yada. But like this takes up 4 lanes of USB of PCIe Gen 4, period, for like one port. Remember, I only have by 1. But that this literally affects those of you with AM5 potentially, depending on like what configuration. For average config, it might not. If you just have a graphics card in there and NVMe's, but in some cases you can't use, or like if you stick an NVMe slot in, instead of disabling your SATA ports like it used to back on AM4, it's going to disable your USB 4 port. Or a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to lose some. I think on certain boards it actually cuts your graphics down to on certain motherboards that having USB 4 enabled, which you couldn't disable before, actually cut your graphics slot from a by 16 to a by 8, because they can't just cut off 4. Can't go from a by 16 to a by 12. So that's why AMD is allowing, and people are like, oh, I'm losing performance. I don't really think you are, but it is kind of dumb. A lot of the way manufacturers set up a lot of these boards is just stupid. Like the lower end ASRock boards, in my opinion, have better PCIe configurations, with more available. They have like a bunch of by 1 slots, by 2 slots, by 4 slots, and then their top end one is like by 16, by 16. If you use anything on the motherboard, you lose that second slot. I mean, might as well get an ITX board then, if you ask me. But if we click on this guy, and then I was their link that is no longer working, that was on the forum page here. I might have had to look it up, or the link might have worked at that point. This was a couple weeks ago when I ordered the card that I just showed you. Right here. And because once I had figured out I wanted this, I was farting around, and while I was searching for what is this thing, that's definitely a render, by the way. It is black. I may paint the slot black just for it to match my stuff, though. Going through here, right, I'm taking a peek at this firmware, and I noticed it gets newer and newer. Like, they have plenty much newer than what that user is saying. That user also says the older version of the chip ends at it has to be a .50. There is only one overlap, at least on this website, where his 2142 and the 3142 overlap with a 50 in the number. So if I would have to use that one, it's going to get kind of complex, right? That's basically going to be the final update if you have to use that one. That is also right around when the drivers just shit the bed and stop being updated. Ignore this guy here, right there, so 2020, that would make sense, right? Well, we got the 3142. It's newer. Well, if we go all the way down to down here, look at this, December of 2024. And it's way more. It's a 24. A lot of these are in the 21s. There's a 23 randomly. Some of this stuff can get really, really messy. And this is why I try to always use generic drivers and generic firmware. Like with the Aquantia 10 gig cards. What is it? AQC 107, I think. You want to get about as unbranded as a card as you can, because Marvell puts the firmware updates and the driver updates out on their own website. However, if you get like the Asus red ones, that's like a something 100 or 1000 or something like that. Or I have the ones that were my original ones were actually from like X99 motherboards, I believe, or X299 motherboards. They're like add-on cards because they couldn't put them in the board yet. Those won't take the updated firmware that makes them Windows 11 compatible, that adds features, that increases buffers, so you almost want about as generic as an implementation as you can, unless there's a known issue with the implementation. One thing there would be like if we go into the OLED stuff, right? What Sony did, because they don't make their own panels anymore, right, is they used LG's panels and they put a heatsink behind them. And that way they can get them brighter, and they can supposedly keep the burning down is because they're cooling them better, more. And that's how they get better specs than the actual LG panel or LG display using the same panel in there. That might be where you'd want a custom firmware or something like that. But in general, like I don't want some customized like Wi-Fi card. I just want the Intel Wi-Fi card to show up as an Intel Wi-Fi card. And that's why some of these are like, wait, we've got 23, 16, 19, 23, 21. Depending on the motherboard's implementation, not all of these might be compatible depending on your generation of chip that's actually on there. Depending on their implementation, I can tell you Dell, HP, Lenovo, they can like not update the graphics drivers for 18 months or be like, yep, you're on the latest one, and you're not. Even if you look at their website and compare it to their updater, like I was told my computer was up to date, and the previous day a BIOS update was released, and I hit check, and it's like, no, you're good, and I'm like, I can literally see you're wrong, right? So that's why I tend to try to still do a lot of this manually. Now, will Windows like literally the latest drivers? There are newer drivers available in Windows Update, and I'm telling you not to manually install the manual drivers unless you have an issue, because the official ones are in Windows Update, and they're 5 years newer than I can download, and maybe even more if you were to compare it to had I been able to get into my folder. I just don't want to refresh that connection right now. That might be a 2018 driver, right? And this did work even with those errors, not errors, I should say. Even with the native Windows driver, flashing this firmware worked. So let me click on this, and you'll see why. This is kind of like the big reason why I'm making this video. Like I said, the exact other item that I have done it for is the Aquantia QNAP. I buy the QNAP 10 GBE. TCI-E by 4. Whew, the price is going up on these bad boys. All right, so this is the guy that I buy. Issues Red 10 GB. Right there, they still sell this piece of. I don't know, this isn't loading. Click on that right here. I bet you I bought it off B&H. I try not to buy from Newegg anymore after they got rid of all their shit. They added restocking fees back, and returning became next to impossible. I think some of that started reversing, because I was able to return my graphics card even after I opened it because it didn't fit. This is the other one I have, the ROG Aerion 10G. So that's the other Asus that I have, right? This is the QNAP that if you were to buy one of these that I would recommend. There might be others that use this AQC 107 that are cheaper. But this guy just shows up as I think probably a Marvell now. Used to be a Quantia. They bought them. A Quantia is now like a line, like the AccuAction line is part of Marvell. But these just show up there. You can just go to the public drivers website for there and grab the firmware and the drivers and just flash it. And you will literally they originally weren't Windows 11 compatible. They updated them to work with the new driver stack that came with Windows 11. It might have been in Windows 10, might have been a little bit later in Windows 11. I don't remember specifically when it is, but they doubled the cache that you were able to do. They doubled, say if originally you were able to do 4 or 8 RSS. I don't have one of these installed in anything anymore. I can kind of do that. Let's see here. We are over here. This guy should have. We can use this guy? Properties, advanced, RSSQs. So you can see 16, right? This is on the Intel. The Aquantia either had 4 or 8, and then they doubled it. I think they might have gone to 16 to compete with this X550 here. I don't remember specifically. Or they might have gone 4 to 8. Either way, they doubled the amount of RSSQs. And then the receive, that needs to be increased in here. The receive and transmit buffers. I mean, here, if you guys want to see how high this goes in here, it's kind of nutty. You got to make sure you got enough RAM. Let's put it that way. 16 gigs for transmit buffers and receive buffers. I want to say the Aquantia originally capped at 4. Right there, 4096 is pretty common. So it went like 4096, 4096. I believe it's updated itself to be more in line with these X550s after that firmware and then subsequent driver update. So you can not only get compatibility. Oh gosh, we're gonna get disconnected from that. You can not only get compatibility, like you remember they updated it so the firmware so it could take the new driver stack from Windows 11 because while they're doing they changed the networking. If you're like, how did they change the networking? You can kind of find out from the Realtek drivers. They changed from NDIS. Do I understand what any of these are without researching it further? No. To Net Adapter CX. That's what happened. So basically those red Asus ones, those useless in Windows 11 without. Okay, I'm not saying so is those. The Arion 10G also useless. You can get them working. And this is kind of where like my familiarity with Windows has its benefits because I'm more in tune with the command line tools, EXEs, and that sort of stuff. Also, you don't see. You guys can hop in here and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see any of these ASMedia firmware version updaters and stuff like that. Like this version of MP tool, that is a Windows tool. Right. Like it is straight up a Windows tool. I don't know if there are any non Windows ones available, right? So yeah, that's kind of what's enabled me to do what I can here. Let's see here. Is things pooping out? Or is this website down? Okay. But if we hit next here and we go down to this latest one, I mean, if you look at some of these other ones, they'll have improves compatibility with AMD chipsets. So like if you're having like the guy in the original thread here was talking about he was having issues with the one built into his ASRock Z270 Extreme 4 board. And yeah, in a lot of cases, ASRock's one of the better ones in this. Like they don't brand all their shit like Asus. Where if you find this firmware and it's compatible, you can just flash it. And even though it's an onboard chip, you can update it. And once you update it, you can get it to take the newer driver or, here, LGA 1700 AM5 compatibility issues. This 23... Really? So like the site's going down as I'm doing this. Lovely. Lovely. All right. Well, it is a good thing then that I do this sometimes for things that I put a lot of time in relating to this. I took a screenshot of the website. Ta-da! There you go. And actually I took multiple because website French. And I had to translate it. So I took a screenshot of that. So they had a compatibility, improved compatibility. There was even something in one of these that said it updated it from if we go into here, nice to fix, yada yada, 50. If you go through here and read, you can CLI, yada yada yada. Some of them, and I remember this back in the day, like you can add with firmware updates, you can add UASP support. You can add, like people were actually getting them to do. Originally, this would have been a USB 3.1 controller, 3.1 host controller, right? So that's 3.1 Gen 1 is 5 gigabit, 3.2 Gen 2, or sorry, 3.1 Gen 2 is 10 gigabit. One of the firmware updates, if I recall correctly from what I was reading, actually update this to be the 3.2 Gen protocol. It's the same 10 gigabits, right? But from a like software negotiation standard, if you just go like, here you go, ASMedia ASM-3142 firmware. And I found a couple other articles, like other people know about updating USB controller ASMedia 3142 reported as 2142. Same driver for both chip. Indeed. So what he's probably got to do is progress through the 2142 firmware until it gets that overlap to where it's only 3142, and then go from there. Because they do, like, you could see in here, it's 2142, 3142. That was the one going back to like 2020 roughly. And then eventually it's only 3142. So you probably have to get it to, when you're doing these firmwares, you may not, I mean, this happens even with AMD motherboards fairly often, where you have to step them through certain versions of firmware, right? And then you got to be at a certain version before you go to another version, otherwise you risk breaking it. There you go, MP tool, yada yada. So even, I told you, QNAP. They're even talking about using this utility. This is that's a 2023 one. Hey, let's download it just to make sure we have it. They're telling you specifically how to update it on your NAS itself, right? So this was just something I had found. A bunch of people are having to fix it on their motherboards because, once again, the actual here's level 1 text forum where I was reading about it a little bit too. The actual brands themselves aren't putting out, like, your motherboard. Technically speaking, this should be included with the BIOS update, okay? But if they just don't choose to update it, it'll never get updated because they just won't publish it. Yeah, here, ASMedia 2142 only gets 5 gigabits, not 10 gigabits. That was fixed in a firmware update, specifically. That was specifically fixed in a firmware update. This looks like a mirror or similar to this other forum thread that we had. But yeah, so this is where you want to get, sometimes you actually have to start trying to figure out like what's actually on the board to fix it. And like if you guys have had flaky USBs, if you're running AM4, AM5, make sure you're updating to the latest AMD chipset driver. That'll help a shit ton. Also, latest BIOS, latest AMD chipset driver. Updating BIOS now is a little bit less scary than it used to be because AMD has mandated BIOS flashback beyond AM5 for every board. I want to say they might have even mandated it starting with like B550, X570S, like late tail end of AM5, or sorry, AM4. But AM5 is required to have BIOS flashback, so it's a little less scary. You do have to, my recommendation to this day is whip out your smartphone, go to any page that you've changed anything, and take a picture of it. Because sadly, almost never are those settings retained. But we've been over before how you need certain BIOS updates for certain things. Sometimes you will even need it to update Windows. Yes, I deal with this at work a lot, or adjacent, because I get stuck with the systems that won't update that are then security threats, and we go and find out it's because they have never had a BIOS update since they were born into this world, right? Which then doesn't allow them to get certain driver updates, because in some cases you need to be on a minimum. Like there are actual like Intel graphics drivers that are too old that can't go to certain versions of Windows 10 and for sure cannot go to Windows 11. So you have to get like all your ducks in a row. You basically need a matching BIOS, chipset driver, and the correct version of Windows. And then everything's happy, right? So if you're having USB stuff, look at that first. Look at your BIOS update. It could be updating this third party if you have a third party USB chipset. Then do your brain is farting, your Windows, do your BIOS update. Then make sure you get the chipset driver. Do not get it from your motherboard manufacturer. Go directly to AMD and get it. Motherboard manufacturer websites just don't fucking update it enough. And that very well could solve your issue. If it still hasn't, there's a chance that you're running a third-party USB controller. Hopefully, because they're the most popular, because literally ASMedia is the ones who, NEC, and then sold basically past the launch. Like NEC designed the tech, launched it successfully. That was even prior to the internal USB 3 header. And micro USB 3.0, two of the worst connectors ever designed. But like the chip, you would get an add-in board. I still have an EVGA one, a 1X slot that adds two USB 3.0 ports to my board, and that was an NEC chip. Anything beyond that has been ASMedia. And how you can figure that out is you can go to your device that is USB connected. Let's say we want our mouse. Mice and keyboards. It's not finding my exact mouse. Keyboards? Nope, it's not finding that. But you can basically switch to, if you had a known USB device, I don't know, it's probably because we're on RDP right now that it's not seeing them specifically, right? But you could switch to your view to by connection, and then it will trace up from, like say if this USB device that's having an issue is your mouse. I have no idea why this USB device is having an issue. But if it was, you could then trace it up. Like, okay, what's it going through? Oh, it's at the USB 3.0 root hub. Oh, it's going in the AMD one. Well, depending on how and you can see it go AMD SM bus. Some of them go through the chipset rather than you can have ports off the CPU directly or off the chipset, depending on how the motherboard's designed. If you go by view by connection here, you may see it down here. And then you can find out, oh, it's on the ASMedia one. Okay, then you can look into this with the firmware update, and that could actually resolve a bunch of your incompatibility. It's surprising. Basically, motherboard manufacturers won't do shit about it until people throw enough of a shit fit. That's part of the reason why like companies will use like bigger places like Dell and Lenovo, because they have big enough companies that once one of them is like, hey, this is affecting us, they'll have to fix it to risk losing their contract. Motherboard manufacturers really don't have that. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the case of that BIOS firmware TPM for AM4, COD played their hand by getting the consumers to force the manufacturers to do it. I don't know if they reached out beforehand or if they just knew it wouldn't happen and then used that consumer leverage on them. But as you can see, Asus still hasn't updated one of my motherboards, when other ones running the same chip have been. It's yeah, like I said, they've done some weird stuff with that red 10 gig network card, because rather than having it just show up as in the past a Quantia or now Marvell, like for them it would have been a Quantia because they had like one of the launch devices. They had to brand it as an Asus XQC100 so that the firmware that fixes all that stuff can't be flashed to it. I mean, it can. There are ways around that. Maybe I'll make a video on that sometime, but I've already done all my cards. But that's why they're going so cheap on eBay. I bet because they without knowing how to get around that, they are not Windows 11 compatible. And I had won the home theater PC, which was the first one to go to Windows 11, and that's why I ended up buying the QNAP card and going from there. Now I just recommend get yourself a used Intel X550. But so yeah, the firm updates can do like crazy things. Like it updated the 2142 from a 5 gigabit to a 10 gigabit. I believe there was some mention. I can't, like, the website's down at for some reason, literally as I'm making this video, which I find crazy. Maybe I'm just hitting it too much from the IP I'm going from. But from my understanding, like, there was an update, from this says 3.2 Gen 2x1 exactly. So that's what the firmware update basically did. Is it changed it, and it's still a 10 gig. Don't get me wrong. Like, you guys are like, well, 3.2 Gen 2x1 is the same as 3.1 Gen 2. Yes, it is. Right? It is. Speed-wise, but not how they communicate. How the actual handshake of the software and the controller to the devices. So, like, my Samsung T9 is a what it would be that's a Gen 2x2, USB 3.1 Gen 2x2. So I'd imagine it's going to have like a better handshake, and I don't know for sure. I'd have to like test this with the old firmware, new firmware. That's not what we're doing here necessarily. But I do know, like, when they added UASP, which is Universal Attached SCSI Protocol, that is what turned USB 3 into truly a storage protocol. It could actually send and receive data at the same time. Whereas prior to that, USB could only send or receive, which is why its performance was appalling. Its IOPS were literal garbage. And that's why a lot of my early USB-C SATA SSD reviewing, effectively, if that SATA drive did not support UASP, I couldn't recommend it. Even if it was technically faster, like had faster NAND, faster controller, because you couldn't actually work off the drive without UASP, because it didn't allow it to work like a storage device, right? It worked like a USB device. You know, like USB is not a storage protocol. UASP allowed that to happen that way, and effectively the extra lanes that came with USB 3 were all for more data bandwidth, right? It was like independent lanes just for that, and they could utilize that for speed, right? Or for doing writing and reading at the same time. In some cases, the maximum throughput was actually worse. But if you looked at the IOPS and actually like working from the drive, much better. You know, it's kind of like the flash drives. If you do a lot of tiny files, they're utterly god awful. And if you do like one giant file, they're like, oh, they might actually hit their speed requirements or their speed recommendations, that sort of stuff. Yeah, but that's not why you're going to use an external SSD. Like, people edit off of them and that sort of stuff, and that's where you want that UASP. These better USB protocols are the same way. They're going to handle that data better. I mean, like, the thing that changes with 2x2 is it basically, you remember how you can flip your USB-C cable? It effectively uses both sides of that, and you can't flip it anymore. Because it's using both of those to double its bandwidth. That's why 2x2 is 20 gigabit. In this case, because they're literally using double the conductors. Instead of having redundancy, to be able to do that, they're doubling it up. So I'm sure I could pull up the change log, but yeah, in there, as somebody mentioned in here, is that effectively it went from and you're gonna read this and be like, oh, that's not exactly what it says, but I was trying to figure out what they were talking about, and that does get to where they literally changed, like I said, just like with the Aquantia network adapters that we were talking about here, like with this QNAP. This went from being not Windows 11 compatible because it had a different like driver stack effectively, to having that new stack, being able to take the new compatible driver, and even having more features. just because of a firmware update that the manufacturer of the chip makes, right? The chip, the guy under this thing here, not Asus, not ASRock, not QNAP, not like one of these was StarTech, not we were talking about High Point. High Point Rocket is what I know them for. These are the Rocket U's for Rocket USB. The other ones would have been like SATA and SAS. They're not developing these updates. It's the company. So that's why realistically we need direct access to these chips, because then you can just use the updaters and update it yourself rather than having to wait for that manufacturer who may never get around to it. And if you're Asus, that still sells that 10 gig adapter still to this day, still Windows 11 incompatible. Yeah, that's pretty normal for them. They launch a product and they abandon it. Well, it's nice to be able to go yourself to either the manufacturer of that chip directly, or other parties who have access to that stuff, or in some cases, like I say, I was going to High Point to get the driver that would then apply to, like on my Asus and ASRock and MSI and all these different motherboards and even laptops, that driver would work. A lot of times just having their generic driver would fix issues that people are having disconnecting USB devices, horrible speed, yada, 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 because they weren't, Dell hadn't updated it, right? Just something to keep in mind, something to look out for. And that's why I specifically got this Galore Trends one with this specific chip, is because not only does it have that 1X, and I knew which chip, like they published which chip it has in it. And then I had found out as I was searching around trying to find, a 1X USB 3.1 controller, because I am going to be plugging in like external SSDs here, or M.2s in a external enclosure. Like I found out, like why this was the chip I needed, why I couldn't get a PCIe 4.0. It's because the chip itself is only 3.0, right? And go from there. Like you got to do your research. Like once I figured out that's the chip I need, okay, well that's when I start searching Amazon for things that use that chip, which really helped me narrow it down. And if I gotta still slap one of my external SSDs in there after I pass it through the VM. I expect to get the full 8 gigabit out of it. I'll throw the T9 on there, do a crystal disk info. But quite happy with this, and thought I'd share, like, this is something else that you guys can do. This is also something that, like, I know how to do in Windows, and a lot of, from my experience, like there are the EXEs that are available. I'm not saying it couldn't be done in Linux. More and more is becoming available that way, but a lot of these, like, I'm not going to say super niche, but like, I mean, there might even be ways to run this in compatibility mode. This is just something that I am really familiar with in Windows. And in the case of like firmware updating those QNAP cards, or even firmware updating the Intel X550s, you can do them in Linux. I also could just chuck them in a Windows PC, and since I have the EXE, just bloop, done. So it's a battle. Do I want to fight with it in Linux and like figure out how to do firmware updaters, or like find out if that's even available and how that works, or do I just want to take the route I know, that I know works, that is available, and just do that, and then take it out of the Windows machine and stick it in the Linux machine. Now, if I couldn't do that, as in it has to be done in the machine it's going to end up in, sure, we'll spend the time and figure it out, if it's even possible. Sometimes it's not. Like that firmware updater, that MCUtil or whatever it is, that may not be available in Windows. Now, it does look like, obviously, QNAP, who has one of these updaters, I don't even know where that is anymore, but they had a suggestion on how to update, like even I'm going to say like command line or terminal arguments, right? That's obviously not Windows, because they're running probably some form of Linux, or FreeBSD on there, maybe, something like that. So I don't know if they went to QNAP. No, neither that either. I'm starting to lag. It's past 3 a.m. ASMedia and getting that or building something themselves. You know, but yeah, sometimes you just gotta stick with what you're comfortable with because you can get the job done. In this case, I thought you guys would be interested in the job. Like you can buy. I think this came with. Here's another thing. Take your screenshots, document your shit. I did not document which firmware this thing came with. I think it was on 21 something, and somebody on GitHub actually made a tool on one of those forum threads for pulling the existing firmware off of cards. So that also might be where we're getting it from. But yeah, take a screenshot before, right? And then do the thing. Even though it says pass, check after, see if it's actually newer. Because I've definitely had stuff where it's like, oh my gosh, the number of Dell BIOSes that I have flashed that tell you they have updated when they fucking haven't. And there's numerous issues why. You need like a pre-flight checklist with some of these computers to get them the BIOS update. It is insane. Maybe it actually threw up in my throat a little bit thinking about that. But yes, take your screenshot beforehand so you know what you're coming from. That way, once it says it's done, you also have to fully power cycle the system, right? Sometimes a restart's enough because that should be a full power cycle. Sometimes I actually have to, for these firmware updates, shut down and power up, right? Also, don't take this lightly if it takes longer. Like this took a while to come back up. What's actually happening is the firmware update may be happening during the UEFI cycle, like the pre-boot, like pre-Windows cycle. Don't shut it down. You will break it. Let it take a little bit longer. I would say upwards of a half hour. It's always, if you have a UPS, make sure it's on it. Just like a normal BIOS update for your motherboard or anything like that. Like just because it flashed it, that doesn't mean often, like even with like BIOS or other things on your motherboard, it'll actually do it on the next startup. And often that'll happen pre-Windows, like I said, via the UEFI. So don't just be like, oh, it's not coming back, I'm going to shut it down real quick. No, give it 10, 15, maybe even 30 minutes if you know your computer is a bit slower than the average, the average kitten down here, or than the PP. Then power cycle it. But in my case, it was actually shut down. It just wasn't, the hardware hadn't turned off, and I've had that happen in systems when doing stuff like this before, where like the Windows shut down, but it didn't either complete the command or send the command to the hardware, so you can just literally tap the power button and it just turns off. Weird. Booted right up, went into Windows, right, set the sign in, was at the correct firmware, all good. So yeah, we're going to test this out. If this goes well, I'm probably going to pick up another one of those Glore Trends once they're on sale, because I got that one as an open box. Maybe wait for another one of those. I saved like $6-7. And that way I can pass both those controllers through. Part of the reason for that is if I want to copy from one device that's plugged into USB to another device that's plugged into USB. Remember, I don't even have the 10 gigabit that would be. Remember, the 10 gigabit is actually, and this happens with USB a lot of you don't know this, the 5 gigabit for USB 3 is for the two ports that are paired. More often than not, there are two ports that are paired to a single chip. That 5 gigabit for the USB is for the controller, the USB controller, not for the per port. So if you're going from one USB controller to the same USB controller, you're not getting 5 gigabits. It's like copying from a hard drive to itself. You get half the performance because you have to read and write. So if you're going to do what I'm going to do, which is going to be backing up M.2s potentially to external devices, you're going to want, and that is why those High Point Rocket cards had one controller per port. Not common to be that way. Mostly stuff that started coming up. I know there's some from Sonnet that are like that as well, on the Mac side. Because when you're dumping stuff, you do want that full speed through there. I've had cards like this, like I said, from shortly after the advent of USB 3.0 because of that. And in this case, that's why I would buy a second card, is not because I need 4 ports. It's more that when I do these transfers, I would want them to be. I can't do 10 gigabit because remember over a by one port, because I don't, with the shitty orientation of the motherboard. On a normal motherboard, I could either move my 10 gig NIC from the 4X slot up to an 8X slot, or I could get one of those big beefy boy X8 USB cards that's running the 40 gigabit and use one of those. I imagine they're not cheap, but I'd be able to do that. But Asus doesn't know how to make. Oh, and by the way, this board was expensive as hell for what it was. It was during that time, though, how I ended up with it was Frozen to get his graphics card, I think, or it might have been a power supply. I think it was graphics card, though. I had to buy one of these. Yeah. And I needed a motherboard at the time, so it was kind of like, well, you're literally not going to do it. You're going to have to try and move it. I'll just pick it up off you. So, not his fault by any means. It's Asus' fault for making a motherboard that was literally pointless, and Newegg for forcing it upon us to allow us to buy items because, fuck us, right? But yeah, hopefully you guys found this interesting. If you got an ASMedia, check if you have an ASMedia USB controller as your third party, because a lot of boards now, this Asus that you saw is too cheap. It only has the one USB-C on the back with so it's got 2 USB 3.1s, one USB-C, one USB-A. All the rest are 3.0s, and they're off either the chipset or the main CPU. So it doesn't have third parties. Now, it's not necessarily bad. I generally tend to prefer boards that do it that way because that's usually going to be the quality ports, right? But often boards will at least put another 2, if not another 4 USB 3 ports on there that are going to be on a third-party controller. And if it's any sort of decent brand that's not trying to cut corners, or it's not like the base level Pro 4 from ASRock board or something like that, they're probably going to be using an ASMedia chip. And hey, you can check with the firmware updater utility to see if it's been updated or not. And if it hasn't, you might be able to gain some reliability, a lot of reliability. A lot of those updates are reliability, compatibility, yada, 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 and be able to use newer drivers from Windows, which also helps. Yeah, at least I would consider ASMedia to be like I always say, get an Intel network card, get an Intel Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Same thing for USB there. Really, I think Renesas makes some USB controllers. Man, that is, I think there's even some lower end stuff than that, but that's kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. Some of you might call me out for that, but it's a compatibility thing. It's you're going with the people who've kind of developed and furthered the third party development, at least, of the technology, and reliability wise, so hopefully you guys gain some useful information in this video. This ghetto screen recording snipping tool, thanks Windows 11, and we'll see you in the future. PP says hi, and we've got Paisley down here who's trying to bite me as I'm holding her back. Peace.